because I do love him.
Certainly. For his money.
No, honestly.
Old Hollywood loved a good love story. But what happens when that story starts with a massive age gap? In this video, 20 actresses who married older men in old Hollywood history, we're diving into real-life romances that were anything but picture-perfect. Some were sweet, some were strategic, and others, just plain heartbreaking. These women were icons, but their personal lives often tell a much darker tale. Were they in love, looking for safety, or stuck in something they couldn't escape? Stay with us, because the last few stories will truly leave you speechless. Let's get into it. Marilyn Monroe and Joe DiMaggio. Love or possession? When Marilyn Monroe married baseball legend Joe DiMaggio in 1954, the world called it a dream match. He was a national sports hero. She was the most desired woman on the planet. But behind the glamorous headlines was a marriage built not on trust, but control. Marilyn was 27, Joe was 39. He was already retired, used to admiration and privacy. She was on the rise, chased by paparazzi and adored by the world. DiMaggio wanted a wife who'd settle into his quiet world. Instead, he married someone who belonged to everyone. Jealousy took over quickly. DiMaggio hated the very thing that made Marilyn who she was: her fame, her sex appeal, her independence. The breaking point came during the now famous scene in The 7-Year Itch, when Marilyn's white dress blew up over a subway grate. Joe reportedly watched from the sidelines, furious. That night, he allegedly lashed out physically. Their marriage ended just 9 months in. Still, Joe never stopped loving her. After Marilyn died in 1962, he arranged for fresh roses to be placed at her grave 3 times a week, for 20 years. "I love her," he once said simply, "and I always will." Some say he was her true love. Others say he only loved the idea of her, the one who stayed home, not the one the world wanted. The truth may be somewhere in between. Their story was never about happily ever after. It was about timing, fame, and 2 people who couldn't meet in the middle. Coming up next is another iconic starlet who married young, searching for safety in a man the studio approved, but got caught in a web of secrets, silence, and pills. Let's talk about Judy Garland and Vincente Minnelli. Judy Garland and Vincente Minnelli, the studio couple with secrets. Judy Garland was just 23 when she married director Vincente Minnelli. He was 38, polished, respected, and someone MGM trusted to handle Judy, who by then had already become both a star and a source of concern for the studio. It wasn't just a marriage, it was a business move. Judy was fragile, overworked, and struggling with addiction. Vincente brought structure to her chaos, but what he didn't bring was real intimacy. He was a man with his own secrets, particularly about his sexuality, which was quietly acknowledged in Hollywood but never spoken of publicly. Their union gave them a daughter, Liza Minnelli, and a few peaceful moments. But Judy wasn't looking for just peace. She needed understanding. Instead, she found distance. Vincente buried himself in work, while Judy fought her demons alone. The public saw them as glamorous, successful, perfectly matched. Behind closed doors, Judy was falling apart. She once said, "I got married because I thought it would help me stop hurting." It didn't. After the divorce, Judy's life became even more unstable. More performances, more pills, more pain. Vincente, meanwhile, stayed in Hollywood and quietly moved on, leaving behind a marriage the studio had staged like a musical, full of color, but missing something real. Their story shows what happens when appearances matter more than connection, and when a woman in pain is paired with a man who can't or won't see it. Up next, a love story that burned fast, burned bright, and ended in the kind of tragedy that only Hollywood could deliver. Let's look at Elizabeth Taylor and Mike Todd. Elizabeth Taylor and Mike Todd, passion, tragedy, and fallout. By the time Elizabeth Taylor married Mike Todd, she had already been through 2 marriages, and she was barely in her mid-20s. But something about Todd, 25 years her senior, felt different. He wasn't a quiet Hollywood husband or a controlling director. He was bold, magnetic, and absolutely obsessed with her. Todd swept Elizabeth off her feet with grand gestures. Diamonds, private jets, parties with royalty. It was a romance built on excess. But it wasn't just the gifts that dazzled her. He gave her confidence, laughter, and a sense of being truly adored. She called him the love of my life. Their chemistry was undeniable, and unlike many of her past relationships, Taylor said she finally felt safe. They married in 1957, and she gave birth to their daughter soon after. It seemed like, maybe, this was the one. But tragedy hit fast. In March 1958, just a year after their wedding, Mike Todd died in a plane crash. Elizabeth was devastated. Friends said she wasn't just mourning a husband, she was grieving a lifeline. In her heartbreak, she turned to someone close. Mike's best friend, Eddie Fisher. That rebound caused one of the biggest scandals in Hollywood at the time, especially since Fisher was married to Debbie Reynolds. Still, Taylor always insisted her love for Todd was pure. He was the one man I truly loved, she said years later, the only one who never hurt me. Their love story was brief, beautiful, and brutal in its ending. And it set the stage for a chain of affairs and heartbreaks that would follow her for the rest of her life. But Elizabeth wasn't the only starlet who tried to reclaim love after heartbreak. Our next actress married the same man twice, hoping that a second chance would fix what the first had broken. Let's take a closer look at Natalie Wood and Robert Wagner. Natalie Wood and Robert Wagner. Twice the romance, twice the mystery. Natalie Wood was just 18 years old when she married Robert Wagner, one of Hollywood's most promising leading men. He was 27, handsome, polished, and already established. Their wedding was splashed across every magazine, a picture-perfect love story straight out of a studio dream. But underneath the fantasy, the cracks were already there. Friends later said that Wagner, though charming in public, could be jealous and controlling in private. Natalie, a rising star in her own right, found herself trying to balance a career and a marriage with a man who didn't always support her independence. Their first marriage ended in 1962, but that wasn't the end. 10 years later, after both had gone through other relationships and personal struggles, they reunited. The press called it a miracle. They remarried in 1972, determined to write a different ending. But some stories don't change, no matter how many times you try to rewrite them. In 1981, Natalie Wood drowned off the coast of Catalina Island during a weekend boat trip with Wagner and actor Christopher Walken. The circumstances remain suspicious to this day. Wagner has always denied involvement, but questions linger. She was afraid of dark water, her sister once said. She would never go near it alone. Their love story began like a fairy tale, but it ended in one of Hollywood's most enduring mysteries. 2 marriages, 1 heartbreaking legacy. Up next is a woman whose marriage ended in more than mystery. It ended in trauma, and left her daughter with scars she'd carry for a lifetime. Let's talk about Lana Turner and Lex Barker. Lana Turner and Lex Barker, a star betrayed at home. Lana Turner had survived scandals before, but nothing could have prepared her for the betrayal that came not from the tabloids, but from her own home. In 1953, she married Lex Barker, Hollywood's former Tarzan. He was older, handsome, and carried himself like a gentleman. To the public, they looked like a fairy tale. But behind closed doors, Barker was a nightmare. He was abusive, violent with Lana, and worse with her daughter, Cheryl Crane. Years later, Cheryl would reveal that Barker had been sexually assaulting her while living under their roof. She was just a child. When Lana found out, she acted fast. She kicked Barker out immediately and filed for divorce. She didn't explain. She didn't perform for the cameras. She just ended it. She believed me without question, Cheryl wrote, and she never let him near me again. Lana took the fallout. Whispers, press frenzy, judgment, but she didn't care. Protecting her daughter meant more than her reputation. This wasn't about a marriage gone wrong. It was about a woman choosing her child over her image, at a time when that choice could cost you everything. And next, we go from a mother's rage to a teenager's confusion. Because when Mia Farrow married Frank Sinatra, it wasn't a romance, it was a power play. Mia Farrow and Frank Sinatra, too young for a legend. Mia Farrow was barely 19 when she married Frank Sinatra. He was 50, powerful, charming, a man who could make or break you with one phone call. At first, Mia was in awe. Who wouldn't be? Sinatra was a god in Hollywood, but their marriage was never about balance. It was about control. Frank loved that Mia was quiet, elegant, and didn't talk back. But when she signed on to star in Rosemary's Baby, everything changed. The shoot ran long. It interfered with his schedule. So, in the middle of filming, Frank had divorce papers hand-delivered to her on set. No warning, no conversation, just the message: "You're done." Mia later said, "I didn't know what I wanted. I just wanted to be loved." They stayed close, weirdly. Maybe it was comfort. Maybe it was control, still. But she never forgot what he took from her: the right to choose her own life without fear of punishment. Sinatra didn't want a partner. He wanted obedience. And Mia, too young to see the difference, paid the price. Coming up, a marriage that looked perfect in photographs, but behind the lens, it was cold, competitive, and quietly devastating. Audrey Hepburn and Mel Ferrer are next. Audrey Hepburn and Mel Ferrer. Grace meets control. Audrey Hepburn was the image of timeless elegance. She lit up the screen with a kind of beauty that didn't beg for attention. It just existed. But when it came to love, Audrey longed for something simple: support, family, peace. What she got with Mel Ferrer was something else entirely. They met in the early 1950s. Ferrer was 12 years older, cultured, articulate, and already a well-known actor and director. Audrey was drawn to his intelligence, his calm demeanor. On paper, he was exactly the kind of man she thought she needed. They married in 1954 and began working together almost immediately. But soon, what seemed like mentorship turned into control. Friends described Ferrer as critical and emotionally distant. He managed her career behind the scenes, choosing roles for her, guiding interviews, even influencing how she dressed. At first, Audrey welcomed it. She was exhausted by fame and wanted someone to take the wheel. But over time, his coldness took a toll. She began shrinking, second-guessing herself, avoiding public attention, and retreating from the confidence that had once made her shine. They had a son, which Audrey later said was her proudest moment. But even motherhood couldn't fix the cracks that kept growing deeper in their marriage. He treated her like a project, one close friend said, and Audrey wasn't a woman who needed fixing. After 14 years, she left him, quietly, with no drama, just a soft exit from a life that had become too small for her. She found happiness later with a man far outside the Hollywood world. But the time she spent with Ferrer left an imprint, a reminder that elegance on the outside doesn't always mean harmony within. And now, we shift from one of the industry's most refined women to a different kind of love story, one that came late in life, after the spotlight had dimmed. But love still found a way. Let's talk about Jane Powell and Dickie Moore. Jane Powell and Dickie Moore, a late love story. In a town built on youth, beauty, and fast-paced love, Jane Powell and Dickie Moore proved that some romances bloom when the cameras stop rolling. Jane Powell had been a singing sensation in the 1940s and 50s, a star of bright Technicolor musicals and the wholesome girl next door. Dickie Moore had once been a child actor, working alongside legends like Shirley Temple. But by the time they met in the 1980s, both had stepped away from Hollywood's spotlight. Jane was 60. Dickie was 69. Their lives had been filled with fame, marriages, losses, and healing. And somehow, through all of it, they found each other. They didn't care about red carpets or headlines. Their bond was based on something deeper: shared history, mutual respect, and a love that didn't need to be dressed up for the cameras. Moore had written a book about the trauma of child stardom, and Jane connected instantly with his honesty. They married in 1988, long after the world had stopped watching. But for them, it wasn't too late. It was just right. We'd both lived entire lives before we met, Jane once said. But this is the love I'll remember. They spent the rest of their years together in quiet contentment. No scandals, no Hollywood meltdowns. Just two people who understood the cost of fame and the value of a real partner. In a video filled with heartbreak and imbalance, their story stands out, a gentle reminder that sometimes the best love stories are the ones that never made the tabloids. But not all late-in-life matches come without strings. Up next is Joan Crawford, who married not for love, but power, and then had to fight to keep both when her husband died. Let's talk about Joan Crawford and Alfred Steele. Joan Crawford and Alfred Steele. Fame, fortune, and a corporate crowd. But by the 1950s, Joan Crawford had already reinvented herself several times. Silent starlet, glamour queen, Oscar winner. But her marriage to Alfred Steele, the CEO of Pepsi-Cola, was a different kind of transformation. It wasn't about co-stars or studio power. It was about staying relevant in a world that had started to move on. She was 50, he was 60. Their marriage wasn't built on red carpet romance. It was strategic, calculated, but not without affection. Steele admired Joan's drive and determination. And Joan? She knew aligning herself with a corporate titan was its own kind of stardom. After their wedding, she didn't fade into housewife life. She became the face of Pepsi, literally. She traveled the world, speaking at business conferences, attending board meetings, even wearing Pepsi blue gowns. People laughed at first, but she didn't care. "This is my job," she said, "and I do it better than any man could." Then Steele died suddenly in 1959. Crawford was devastated, not just personally, but professionally. The new Pepsi board wanted her gone. She fought back, refusing to be pushed out. She stayed on the board for years, showing up in full makeup and heels to prove she still mattered. Joan's marriage to Steele wasn't the love story Hollywood expected, but it was the one she chose. And when the man was gone, she kept going anyway. Up next, another legend of the screen tried to escape chaos by marrying a quieter man. But Bette Davis quickly learned that even an ordinary husband can bring extraordinary drama. Bette Davis and William Grant Sherry, from love to loathing. Bette Davis was never one to do things halfway, on screen or in life. So when she married artist William Grant Sherry in 1945, it surprised many. He wasn't from the industry. He wasn't famous. He was 10 years older, calm, grounded. Everything Bette thought she wanted. At first, she embraced domestic life. They had a daughter, BD, and for a short while, Bette stepped away from her powerhouse persona. But peace wasn't in her nature, and Sherry soon showed he wasn't up to the storm that came with being Mr. Bette Davis. He resented her fame, and she resented his resentment. Their home became a war zone, one filled with shouting matches, jealousy, and long silences. She later said, "It's a sad thing when a man is frightened of his own wife's ambition." The marriage ended in 1950 with a bitter divorce that only added to Bette's reputation as difficult. But the truth is, she was never difficult. She was just unmanageable. And Sherry wasn't built for a woman like that. Next, we enter the world of Debbie Reynolds, who thought she'd married a stable man, only to find out he was gambling away her life, piece by piece. Debbie Reynolds and Harry Carl, a kind star meets a gambling secret. Debbie Reynolds was America's sweetheart, a singing, dancing beam of light who seemed untouchable. But behind the charm and bright smile was a woman who carried more than her share of heartbreak. After her very public divorce from Eddie Fisher, who left her for Elizabeth Taylor, Debbie tried to move forward. And in 1960, she married shoe magnate Harry Carl, a man 13 years her senior. On the surface, Carl seemed like everything Eddie wasn't: stable, mature, financially secure. Debbie was looking for calm, for someone who would protect her instead of betray her. But what she didn't know was that Carl had a secret, and it would almost ruin her. Harry Carl had a gambling addiction, not the flashy Vegas kind, the quiet, slow drip kind that drains bank accounts without anyone noticing until it's too late. While Debbie was working, performing, raising her children, Carl was gambling away her earnings, her trust, her future. By the time she realized what was happening, he had lost millions, including Debbie's own money and funds set aside for their children. But instead of immediately walking away, she tried to fix it. She worked non-stop. Television specials, concerts, even opening her own hotel and casino in Las Vegas. Anything to stay afloat. "I was always the one cleaning up the mess," she once said. "I'd go on stage smiling, even when I was drowning." In the end, it wasn't love that broke the marriage. It was debt. Mountains of it. Their divorce in 1973 left her emotionally drained and financially wrecked, but still standing. Debbie Reynolds never let the world see her crumble. She raised her children, rebuilt her life, and became a symbol of resilience in an industry that thrives on collapse. But not every actress came out stronger. Our next story takes us to Ava Gardner, a woman who married a genius only to be emotionally taken apart, piece by piece. Ava Gardner and Artie Shaw, genius or emotional tyrant? Ava Gardner was one of the most stunning women to ever grace a movie screen. Men fell at her feet. The press followed her every move. But for all her beauty and power, she couldn't protect herself from the emotional damage inflicted by her second husband, Artie Shaw. She was just 19. He was 31. Shaw wasn't an actor. He was a jazz legend, brilliant, driven, and known for treating women like footnotes in his own story. Ava was drawn to his intelligence, the way he made her feel small in a good way, at first. But once the honeymoon faded, that smallness stopped feeling romantic. Shaw belittled her regularly. He mocked her Southern accent, told her she wasn't smart enough, questioned her career, her choices, even her worth. Ava, who had grown up poor and uneducated, began to believe him. He didn't want a wife, she once said. He wanted a student, a disciple. The emotional toll was heavy. She began to question everything: her talent, her confidence, her place in Hollywood. After just 1 year of marriage, she walked away, but the damage lingered. Shaw would go on to marry multiple women, including another screen legend, Lana Turner. Ava, for her part, found brief peace in later relationships, but she never forgot what Shaw had taken from her: her sense of self. Some marriages are broken by betrayal, others by tragedy, but this one was broken by silence. The kind that wears you down until you forget who you were before it started. Coming up, another leading lady who thought marrying an older man would bring stability, but ended up emotionally stranded in a marriage built more on status than affection. Let's talk about Olivia de Havilland and Marcus Goodrich. Olivia de Havilland and Marcus Goodrich, a classic star's quiet struggle. Olivia de Havilland was the definition of grace under pressure. Known for her poise, intelligence, and unforgettable roles in Gone with the Wind and The Heiress, she wasn't the type to get swept up in a scandalous romance. But even the most composed women can find themselves in marriages that chip away at their spirit. In 1946, Olivia married Marcus Goodrich, a Navy veteran and novelist 18 years her senior. He was brilliant, well-spoken, and at first a welcome contrast to the chaos of Hollywood. She was 30, he was 48. The world saw it as a sophisticated match, two intellectuals in love. But once the wedding celebrations ended, reality set in. Goodrich, despite his charm, wasn't supportive of Olivia's career. He resented her fame, her success, and the fact that she commanded attention wherever she went. Behind closed doors, there was tension, silent dinners, arguments that never resolved, and a growing emotional distance Olivia hadn't expected. They had one son, but even parenthood couldn't close the gap. Olivia later admitted she often felt isolated in the marriage, lonely, unappreciated, and unsure how she had gotten there. "I married a man who didn't love my light," she once said, "only my shadow." After 6 years, she left the marriage and never spoke much of it again. Olivia went on to live a full, independent life, one of the few Golden Age actresses to reach 100 with her legacy intact. Goodrich, meanwhile, faded into the background of her story. From a quiet struggle to one of the most shocking and tragic unions in Hollywood history, we now turn to a love story that ended in death, and a scandal that MGM tried desperately to hide. Let's talk about Jean Harlow and Paul Byrne. Jean Harlow and Paul Byrne, Beauty and the Darkest Ending. Jean Harlow was Hollywood's original blonde bombshell. With a laugh that could stop traffic and a screen presence that radiated sex and vulnerability, she became a legend by the time she was 21. But her love life was anything but glamorous. In 1932, she married Paul Byrne, a top executive at MGM and a man 22 years older. Byrne was well-respected, deeply involved in the studio system, and known for shaping the careers of others behind the scenes. To MGM, pairing their rising starlet with a powerful executive felt like perfect branding. But behind the headlines was a relationship built on secrets. Byrne was rumored to be impotent, a devastating secret for a man trying to keep up appearances in a cutthroat industry. Their marriage was said to be unconsummated, filled with tension and quiet sadness. Just 2 months after their wedding, Paul Byrne was found dead in their home with a gunshot wound to the head and a suicide note nearby. The contents of that note were never fully revealed. MGM scrambled into damage control, staging a cover-up to protect Harlow's image and the studio's reputation. Jean never spoke publicly about what happened. She returned to work within days. Her silence said everything. She went back to set like nothing happened, one crew member said. But her eyes were different. Harlow died just 5 years later at 26 from kidney failure. Young, beautiful, and still a mystery. Theirs was a love story drenched in sadness. One that began with hope, ended in scandal, and left behind more questions than answers. Next, we look at a woman who gave up everything for what she thought would be a royal fairy tale, only to find herself trapped behind palace walls. Let's talk about Grace Kelly and Prince Rainier. Grace Kelly and Prince Rainier. The royal fairy tale that wasn't Grace Kelly was the closest thing America had to royalty. Elegant, intelligent, and beloved by audiences across the globe. But when she gave it all up to marry Prince Rainier of Monaco in 1956, the world called it a fairy tale. In reality, it was far more complex and far less romantic than it appeared. She was 26, he was 33. Their courtship was fast and heavily publicized. Grace, fresh off an Oscar win, was at the peak of her career. Rainier, on the other hand, needed a bride. Monaco's future depended on him producing an heir, and Grace checked every box, refined, Catholic, and from a wealthy, respected American family. They wed in a lavish ceremony watched by over 30 million people. It looked like a dream. But the moment the doors to the palace closed, Grace's world changed. She was no longer an actress, no longer allowed to work, no longer in control. Life at the palace was strict and formal. Grace struggled to adjust. She missed her art, her independence, and the creative world she'd left behind. Behind her composed smile was a woman slowly disappearing. She once told a friend, "I gave up everything for him and for Monaco. But what did I keep for me?" She devoted herself to motherhood and royal duties, always dignified, but always a step removed from the vibrant life she once had. Though she never openly criticized Rainier, those close to her saw the tension, the confinement, the sadness behind her eyes. In 1982, Grace suffered a stroke while driving and died after crashing her car off a mountainside. She was just 52. The world mourned a princess, but many mourned the actress, the artist, the woman who left Hollywood and never truly returned. And now, we close with a story unlike all the others. A woman whose name deserved to be among the stars, but whose love life was silenced by laws, racism, and fear. Sometimes, the most tragic marriages are the ones that never had a chance. Let's talk about Anna May Wong. Anna May Wong and the ones she couldn't marry. Anna May Wong was Hollywood's first Chinese-American movie star, a trailblazer with striking beauty, fierce talent, and a presence that couldn't be ignored. But while her films made headlines, her love life was written in whispers. Wong never married, not because she didn't want to, but because the system wouldn't let her. In 20th century America, Anti-miscegenation laws made it illegal for her to marry white men in many states. And in Hollywood, casting her opposite Asian men was rare. Studios preferred to give those roles to white actors in yellowface. She was boxed in professionally and personally. Even the roles she played were tragic. Submissive lovers, doomed concubines, women who could never be chosen. Off-screen, Anna quietly dated older white men, often powerful producers or intellectuals. But the relationships stayed hidden. She couldn't go public. A wedding could have ended her career or even led to legal consequences. She once said, "I've been the maid, the mistress, the slave, but never the bride." As other actresses on this list faced heartbreak, Anna endured something more silent and more cruel: invisibility. She died in 1961, just as the civil rights movement was gaining steam, alone, unwed, and largely forgotten by the industry she helped build. Her story isn't just about the men she couldn't marry. It's about the love she was denied by a system that didn't see her as fully human. And with that, we've reached the end of our journey through love, loss, and the harsh truths behind old Hollywood's silver screen. Thanks for watching 20 Actresses Who Married Older Men in Old Hollywood History. These stories were emotional, messy, and unforgettable. If you felt something, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Tell us which story hit hardest. More powerful Hollywood truths are coming soon. Don't miss what's next.